Good morning, guys. It's about 6:30 in the morning and I'm out on the Clive River this morning, heading towards the mouth of the river, about an hour away from high tide, so the paddling is easy. And the mouth of this river is also the confluence of three rivers that flow down the Heretitonga Plains: the Tutaikuri, the Ngāruoro and the Clive. And once I get down near the mouth, I'm going to paddle up one of the other two rivers, probably the Ngāruoro. Welcome to podcast number 47, which I am going to title something along the lines of The Tomb of the Master. In my previous podcast, I suggested that this last podcast in the Golden Dawn Altar Diagram series, I was maybe going to cut it into two podcasts, and I've decided I'm going to do that. So the subject matter for these last two podcasts is the Golden Dawn Vault of the Adepts. And this first one of the two is basically going to be about the background, the historic background to the concept of the Vault of the Adepts. Because there's a bit of context which is useful to understand before we go into the details of the meaning of the symbolism of the vault.
They say she had a heart attack. I think the creature's coming back. And I am fine, cause all my love's electrifying. And I'm comfy like a cesspool. I wanna be with you, and it's my premonition. I better give my heart a listen. And my preacher said, all of your demons will wither away. Ecstasy comes and they cannot stay. You'll understand when you come my way. Cause all of my demons have withered away. All of your demons will wither away. Ecstasy comes and they cannot stay. You'll understand when you come my way. Cause all of my demons have withered away. All of my demons have withered away. work himself to death. I wanna dance till my last breath, but Mr. Portrait only parties hard and impulsive. Coffee like a cesspool. Wanna be with you, wanna be with you. And it's my premonition, I better give my heart a listen. And my preacher said, all of your demons will wither away. Ecstasy comes and they cannot stay. You'll understand when you come my way, 'cause all of my demons have withered away. All of your demons will wither away. Ecstasy comes and they cannot stay. You'll understand when you come my way, 'cause all of my demons have withered away. All of your demons wither away. All of your demons. And you'll understand when you go my way. When you go my way. When you go my way. Oh no, no. When you get me down. Yeah, when you get me down. I better give my heart a listen. 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 'Cause the preacher said, all of mine. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So here we go. I think this is take number 3. You're listening to podcast number 47. It is Thursday the 8th of July 2021. So as I mentioned in my previous podcast, I was thinking of breaking up this last podcast, which is actually on the altar diagram for the 5 equals 6 grade in the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn. I was considering breaking it into 2 separate podcasts. And I am going to do that. So podcast 47, this one will be some context or background to the situation which exists around the concept of what the Golden Dawn called the Vault of the Adepts, which is where the altar diagram for the 5 = 6 degree can be found. And it's not, because the altar diagram for 5 = 6 is quite a complicated subject, it's a complicated set of visual images. I don't feel that I would be doing the subject the honour it deserves if I didn't first provide some background, some context upon which to base my discussion on the altar diagram for 5 = 6. That's largely because the whole concept of the Vault of the Adepts and what it represents has an ancient tradition in the Western Hermetic mysteries, and I feel not a lot of people are aware of this tradition, or certainly are not aware of the details of this tradition, particularly as it is in history, the parts of it which are closer to our own time. So where shall we begin? The altar diagram for the 5 = 6 grade is found inside a room which the Golden Dawn Adepts call the Vault of the Adepts, and there is a legend attached to this vault, or actually 2 different legends attached to this vault, which explains what it is and how it came about. And so we want to discuss one of those legends, particularly here in this podcast. The other legend involves the story of the mythological character Christian Rosencreutz, who is said to be the founder of the Rosicrucian fraternity. When the Rosicrucians exposed their existence to the public in roughly 1614 by publishing a pamphlet where they talked about their structure, their history and their purpose, one of the things that they did was talk about the life and history of the guy who allegedly founded the Rosicrucian fraternity, Christian Rosencreutz. So there were eventually 2 pamphlets published, and they are known today as the Rosicrucian Manifestos. And part of the story which is told in those manifestos, I'm not going to go into any detail about this. If you Google the search phrase Rosicrucian Manifestos, you'll find a ton of information, and you can read them, the actual copies of the manifestos yourself. But one of the things that's discussed in the manifestos is the life of Christian Rosencreutz and his death. And the legend is that when he died, a special room was built to house his tomb, and that room was a 7-sided heptagon, and it contained a bunch of information which was designed to present that vault as a simulacrum, a symbolic simulacrum of the universe, all the laws of nature, the structure of the universe. So in the 5 = 6 ceremony, when the candidate is brought into the room, they don't see the vault at first, but eventually they are explained the story, the mythological story about how some adepts of the Rosicrucian order were refurbishing the meeting hall where the Rosicrucians gathered, and eventually found the original door into the original crypt, and then the whole story of the burial of Christian Rosencreutz and the symbolism of the crypt is explained. So part of the internal furniture of that crypt contained what we will call the altar diagram for the 5=6 ceremony. Now, the important thing about this idea of a vault or crypt where the hero of an esoteric story was buried and then rediscovered goes way back in Western Hermetic history, back even into the Middle Eastern Hermetic esoteric history, where the same pattern of concepts were used as a model and a grading system for training Hermetic students. The guys who originally created the Golden Dawn system, as we understand it today, were Freemasons. And they were high-ranking Freemasons, which means that they had been members of and been involved in almost all of the different funny little side orders, the major side orders, and of course the original 3 degrees of craft masonry. So they knew all the strange and unusual stories and legends and mythology that were presented in Masonic ritual. And one of the concepts which comes from Freemasonry most immediately for us is the concept of a tomb or a crypt or a vault which is hidden somewhere and rediscovered again by initiates, and that in that rediscovery some kind of a secret or a mystery is revealed and explained, and that becomes the summit of the initiatory program, usually, for whichever Hermetic fraternity is presenting the story. So because these Freemasons were aware of this very ancient concept of a hidden vault or crypt which was rediscovered again, they used that same story in the 5=6 grade of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. They used the vault of Christian Rosencreutz, which was described in the manifestos, as the central theme for that crypt, but they added to it an ancient concept that this crypt or vault was hidden in the center of a mountain, and this mountain is usually called the magic or sacred or mystical mountain of magic or of the Western Hermetic tradition. So most immediately to us, this same theme comes into Freemasonry from a Masonic order known as the Holy Royal Arch. If you are a Freemason, you'll know that once you do the first 3 degrees of craft masonry, which every Mason goes through, if you want to go further, and a lot of Masons don't go further, they're just happy with those 3 degrees. If you want to go further and advance in Masonry, one of the options which is open to you is to join the Royal Arch, the Holy Royal Arch. And the story of the Holy Royal Arch begins at the return of the Jews from Babylon after the exile, the diaspora. And as the Jews are coming back to Jerusalem, they are making plans to build the second temple. And so the story in Freemasonry in the Royal Arch begins when they're selecting the stonemasons who will be responsible for building the second temple at Jerusalem. So once the Masons are selected, they go to the old ground where the first temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians, and there's rubble there that needs to be cleared, so the foundations of the temple will be clear for rebuilding. And during that clearing process, 3 masons discover a capstone which they pull out of the ground, and underneath it is a hole and a cavern. They lower a guy down into it, and he discovers one of the most important secrets in Freemasonry. So the idea is that when the second temple was built, underneath it there was a secret vault which contained secret knowledge that the high priests of Judea had hidden away from public view, and that these stonemasons rediscovered that knowledge. And that then, this is why stonemasons were revered and given a special place in history by royalty and by the authorities, particularly of Judea, because they had the distinctive position in history of having rediscovered the secret room and the hidden secret of the Second Temple and of Freemasonry, the missing word of Freemasonry. So this is a vault in the ground, similar to the story that's told in the 5 equals 6 degree of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where we are told briefly and without too much detail that there is a crypt or tomb of adepts that is concealed in the centre of a special mountain, and that mountain is called Abbey Ignis, and some detail is explained about the nature of that mountain and its name. And if you're interested, I suggest you do a search online for Vault of the Adepts or 5 equals 6 Golden Dawn ritual, and read the details of the vault and the mountain that are explained there. The creators of the Golden Dawn system, as we know it, because there was probably an earlier system that we don't know of today, added this information into the 5 equals 6 ritual really only for historic purposes and to give a hint of some kind of connection to an ancient tradition. But they don't elaborate on the secret, and they don't elaborate on the history of the secret. So that's not the Royal Arch degree is not the only example of a secret crypt or vault in Freemasonry in the higher degrees. There are actually other references to hidden crypts or vaults in other degrees, and I am not, although I've been involved in a number of Masonic orders and degrees, I have not seen reference to these other crypts or vaults actually in the temple and gone through the degrees to know what they are in detail, but I have read about the nature of some of these other crypts or vaults. So one of the things we do know is that there is a long history in Freemasonry, at least 250 years, possibly going back 300 or 350 years, of the concept of secret vaults being hidden and rediscovered, and a special mystery being rediscovered in those vaults inside of the Masonic system. Another thing that we know about Freemasonry is that at the end of the 17th century, the original authentic Western Hermetic tradition went through a crisis which caused the tradition to start to fall apart, and the true secrets of magic, alchemy and initiation were left being held in the hands of only a few individuals, and that knowledge went underground through the 18th and 19th centuries. At the end of the 19th century, towards the middle and end of the 19th century, in the 1800s in Europe, an attempt was made to revive these mysteries. the knowledge of alchemy, the knowledge of magic, and the methods for authentic initiation. And we can see these stories about attempts at this revival begin with the story of Eliphas Levi's life and what he did in France to try and rebuild a theory about what the Western Hermetic mystery tradition was really about. And then at the end of the 1800s, of course, this all came to a head where in 1888 the Golden Dawn was created, and a Hermetic order was built almost from the ground up, which was designed to embody all of these kinds of concepts which Eliphas Levi had discussed in his books. They're very worth reading. They should be taken with a grain of salt, but because they are history and because they show an attempt at trying to reclaim the Western mystery tradition on a popular and mainstream level, they're worth reading just to see what was going on at that time and how much they knew. So of course what happened with Levi and the creation of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was really the birth of the popular or mainstream level of occultism. At first it wasn't actually that way, it was underground, but of course with the exposure of Levi's books and with the exposure of the Golden Dawn's teachings, because of Aleister Crowley and Israel Regardie, that those exposures formed the ground bed of the modern mainstream or popular Western mystery tradition. So these Masons were part of an organisation, European Freemasonry, and particularly British Freemasonry, which had served the purpose for 200 or 300 years of preserving and babysitting what was left of the original authentic Western Hermetic tradition. On the surface in Freemasonry, almost none of that knowledge could be found, but Freemasonry, because of its nature, attracted to it a lot of people who were involved in the authentic tradition. They were either authentic magicians, authentic alchemists, or they knew the truth about authentic Western Hermetic initiation. And because they were looking for other people to mingle with, Freemasonry became the place to make those connections and to establish that networking environment. So in a manner, after the old authentic tradition collapsed at the end of the 1600s, Freemasonry became the nursery of the modern, what would be the modern popular or mainstream tradition that would attempt to give birth again to the authentic Western mystery tradition. So whatever Freemasonry contained, or shall we say contains, were sort of the leftovers and the superficial surface knowledge which it could grasp that originally came from the old authentic tradition. And one of the things that it claimed and preserved was the mythology of the crypt, the hidden crypt that was discovered and a mystery was revealed. This mystery tradition of the sacred or magical mountain we can see going back through the alchemical writings of the European alchemists of the 15th and 14th centuries, back into the 13th century, and we see people like Thomas Vaughan actually display a picture of an early initiation ceremony, and he titled that picture the school of the magic mountain. And we can see displayed in a symbolic diagram the grades of that magical training system, and we also see an angelic kind of figure in what is like a temple room with an altar and a candle in the centre, and a candidate blindfolded undergoing an initiation ceremony. At the top of that diagram we see a mountain which is called the invisible magical mountain, and at the top of that mountain are bunches of grapes. And that mountain is a symbol of the climbing through the grades of the magical training system. And the grapevines at the top of that mountain represent the tradition of the training system itself. And we can see in the Gospels Christ and some of the apostles discussing the symbolism of grapes and the grapevine and relating them to the idea of the higher genius and the cultivation of initiates by God and the higher intelligent beings connected with the initiatory system. So grapes and grapevines became a long time symbol from before the beginning of the Christian era of the mystery tradition itself and of the details of how the mystery tradition unfolded and what its training was like. So much so that we find the pseudo Raymond Lully, who was one of the earliest alchemists in the Western alchemical tradition, when he was writing books explaining the great work of confecting the Philosopher's Stone, he chose to use a code system, a symbolic Hermetic language, which was based on talking about the chemistry of the Philosopher's Stone, process of making the Philosopher's Stone, and compared it to the process of making wine from grapes. So many of the substances that are used for making the Philosopher's Stone were compared to, symbolically or metaphorically compared to, the substances that we find in the process of enology or winemaking. So this wine tradition or viticulture tradition or enological tradition of using grapes and winemaking as a secret code for initiation and for discussing the core of alchemical knowledge goes back a long time, at least to the beginning of the Christian era. But if we take the historic stream of the magical, mystical, initiatory, sacred mountain mythology even further back in history, we can trace it back to the Middle East and particularly to Egypt. And not just Egypt alone, but a number of cultures around the world that built pyramids or something similar. For example, in ancient Britain, it was not uncommon to build stone chambers and then to cover them with a small hill of soil and rubble in order to create a very similar but smaller scale version of the idea of a secret crypt or tomb or cavern in the centre of a hill or mound or mountain where a dead hero was buried and could be rediscovered and possibly interacted with. But of course, one of the most obvious, well-known examples of this very ancient synthetic magical mountain concept can be found in ancient Egypt with the pyramids, which are, of course, are artificial hills or mountains that in their centre have secret crypts or vaults or tombs, and that while academics believe they were simply tombs, occultists are well aware that these artificial mountains with caverns or tombs in their centre were more likely to have been the centre of initiatory cults of some kind, where rites of initiation were carried out. That's probably the most agreeable and common theory where occultists are concerned about what the pyramid culture was actually for. That different cults of initiation had their own pyramids where they carried out their own rites of initiation, or possibly degree rites, and ultimately the rites of death and rebirth. In Egypt, which are most well known, connected with the cult of Osiris and his death and resurrection. And the cult of Sokar and rebirth in the cavern of Sokar through the journey of the underworld, and rebirth on the eastern horizon as Khepra. So this is the context that I wanted to present in this podcast, which explains a bit of background to why the original Rosicrucians, if they actually existed, who wrote the manifestos, created a legend about their founder. So he's a hero figure. He founded an esoteric organization, and where he was buried, and what he was buried in, and its meaning, and his rediscovery, which is a mythological or a mystery play reenacted in the dramas of the Rosicrucian initiatory systems. The Rosicrucians designed the story based on an ancient theme, and the Golden Dawn picked up the same story, used it probably in the same way as Rosicrucians did, who were Rosicrucian fraternities who were created after 1914 and up until the present day. All the different Rosicrucian groups that founded their systems upon the original Rosicrucian manifestos, who also had ritual initiations, a lot of those organisations probably based their mystery play or mystery story upon the death and discovery of Christian Rosencreutz. The Golden Dawn, of course, added, as I said before, that extra dimension where they related it to the Mount Abiegnes and said that the crypt theologically and ideally was actually found in the centre of a mountain, a mystical mountain, which they called the Mountain of God. So here we have the background story to what I'm going to present in the next podcast, which is the actual explanation of the 5=6 altar diagram itself. The actual altar diagram is painted on the lid of the sarcophagus, of the symbolic sarcophagus of Christian Rosencreutz. But in fact, the entire interior of the vault is part of the 5=6 altar diagram, and it has a very complex meaning which it will take an entire podcast for me to go through and explain the nature of. So I think that is more than enough background. This is probably a brief video compared to my other podcasts. I'm not sure if I've been talking for an hour yet, as I usually do. But certainly that should be enough information for you to do a little more research into the background if you so desire. But it certainly will help understand why the Golden Dawn adepts chose, when they were designing their system, a little story at 5=6 about the rediscovery of this tomb or vault. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next podcast, which will be about the Vault of the Adepts itself.
They said she had a heart attack. I think the creature's coming back. And I am fine, 'cause all my love's electrifying. And I'm comfy like a cesspool. I wanna be with you, and it's my premonition. I better give my heart a listen. And my preacher said, all of your demons will wither away. Ecstasy comes and they cannot stay. You'll understand when you come my way. 'Cause all of my demons have withered away. All of your demons will wither away. Ecstasy comes and they cannot stay. You'll understand when you come my way. 'Cause all of my demons have withered away. All of my demons have withered away. They said he shook himself to death. I wanna dance till my last breath. But Mr. Portrait only parties hard and hardship. Coffee like a cesspool. Wanna be with you, wanna be with